Hey everybody, welcome back. So this is lecture 2 of module 2, and in this section we're going to talk a little bit about the Wortman article, the Che article, and give you a couple of examples. I also added a short video, it's only 6 minutes long, building an AI-enabled enterprise that follows the cloud computing and emerging trends on big data analytics article. I included this article this video rather, because I feel like the article is a little bit broad, and although it introduces a lot of great terms and gives you some good perspective on how cloud computing has facilitated big data analytics, I also wanted you to understand a little bit more about how companies can use AI, and an example of how a company like Salesforce kind of brings their products together using AI so that they're better enabled for an enterprise. So we're going to talk a little bit first about the Wortman article. The Wortman article is, I really like this. I used this when I wrote my dissertation because it gives a really good example of how companies move from custom developed to servitization, which is where the product is provided by a larger enterprise, and it's built kind of pay as you go. You're not investing in all the infrastructure, but instead you get that product. So the auto industry went from custom, bespoke, manufacturing, where every single vehicle, all the parts and everything were built right there, on site at Ford and GM and Toyota, and they moved through a process where little by little pieces of that vehicle were taken by suppliers, and the responsibility for providing a component as opposed to a piece was then absorbed by the supplier. And then the supplier would bring that component, that module back together, and the assembly process went from, screwing in little bolts and things of every single component of the vehicle to assembling modules of systems, like for instance the seating system. So Ford used to do these themselves, and now a supplier takes the entire seating system and brings it in for each individual vehicle. And what you see is that that the ability for customization is reduced, but the efficiency and the ability to provide something at a lesser cost replaces it. So you can no longer, it used to be, this was decades ago, you could customize a Ford vehicle any way you wanted. Now, of course, it was built by hand, and so it took a very long time, and you wouldn't go to a dealer and just buy it. You would have to order it and wait. But you could get anything you wanted on a Ford vehicle. Well, now that's, not the case. The vehicles have these standard components, and, you guys have gone in to buy a car, and you can choose this, and this goes with this, and this goes with that, but you can't put that other thing with this. So, if you choose to have leather interior, you're going to get this and this and that, because that's how the supplier has put everything together. And so it becomes more and more, less and less custom, more and more standard. And this creates economies of scale. So suppliers are able to leverage relationships they have with their suppliers, obviously. So maybe instead of buying 16 different colors of leather, now they buy a whole bunch more of 3 different colors of leather: the beige, the gray, the black, whatever it is. They're able to get those economies of scale from mass ordering, and they're able to pass those on to their own, to the OEM, and so they can be then passed on to consumers. So this ability to reduce customization to improve the return and the ability to charge less money to the consumer and improve the value proposition for the consumer is something that happened very naturally in the automotive industry over, I think it was like 90 years, 100 years, from 1880 to I think 1970. The same thing happened within the computer industry. It happened quicker. It wasn't 100 years, but the same thing happened where companies used to develop all their own software on site. So, and it wasn't necessarily the core of the business, software that supported the core of the business, but instead it was software that did everything from accounting, customer relationship management to expense reporting, etc. So they were investing in this type of custom development, which at a time, and this is part of where the Che article comes in, back in the 2000s, there was a study done by Bharadwaj where they looked at a company's ability to develop software, so their strength in IT, as a competitive advantage against competition. So it created a barrier to entry. And there was evidence back in, and it probably wasn't 2000. I think the article came out in 2000. I think the study was done in the late 90s, where there was a direct connection between a company's ability to do their own software development and competitive advantage. So, but what happened was over time, that article was challenged over and over again. And this was the last article that Che wrote, where what they saw was a connection between the servitization of software, so cloud computing and software as a service and the internet, that allowed smaller businesses to capitalize on existing software, like software as a service, where they're just paying as they go. So they're not investing in software developers. They're not investing in hardware and software. Instead, you've got a small company with, a few users, and you just pay to use, tools like Salesforce. And, at the time, because this was still back in the mid 2000s, Salesforce was there, but, tools like SAP and Oracle and stuff were all there to reduce the the need for companies to write their own software. So instead of investing in software development, they were able to just pay as they went, leverage software using the cloud and software as a service to improve their competitive environment. Thus reducing the barriers to entry to compete with these larger firms, with these on-site developers. And what happened was the smaller firms that were using the software as a service and cloud computing were getting better performance. And it was because they're using better software. So it was very difficult for firms that developed their own software to maintain it. And those that had, significantly customized tools like SAP were having a very hard time getting up to the latest level, where software as a service changed that, because you're not changing the code base in software as a service, you're just configuring it for your organization. So if like a screen has, maybe 20 parameters that you can use and all you need are 10, you can just hide the other ones. You're not taking them out, you're not making changes to the code, you're just hiding them so that when updates come along, there's no software that has to be changed in order to accept that update. So that disparity that used to be an advantage for these large companies became an advantage for the smaller companies and enabled them to be more agile because their software was more up to date, and they didn't have to spend a bunch of money keeping things up to date as the older companies did. A good example of a small company competing with large companies is Uber. So if you look up Uber, and I know Uber's been around for a long time, but they use AWS, they use Salesforce. So as a very small company, when they started out, they were able to provide superior service, right? So we all loved our app. The alternative to Uber, and many of you probably remember, but some of you don't, was calling a cab. So you'd get on your phone and you'd have to look up the number and, and call a cab, or if you were at an airport, obviously they were there. But with Uber, we were allowed with the touch of a button to have the company know where we were, find the closest vehicle, and allow these people to come and pick us up and take us to where we needed to go. So it by leveraging cloud and software as a service, they were able to disrupt an existing enterprise of taxi cabs and limo services and things like that never had the ability to invest in on any of these things. And so they were able to to disrupt and to really move significantly forward in a very entrenched industry. And obviously there were lots of barriers to entry to compete with cab companies and limo companies, right? You had to have vehicles. Well, Uber didn't buy a bunch of vehicles. Instead, they used technology to leverage, crowdsourcing, basically getting these drivers to be able to participate. And they enabled something that no one would ever have thought of. So it's an example of how, rich technology can provide a competitive advantage to a newcomer that can then use all of those features and functions to better compete and service customers than maybe an existing and entrenched business. This is why software as a service has created this ability to compete. And when we get to our next module, artificial intelligence, this is also built on all of these types of technology like cloud computing and things like that have enabled us to be able to provide these advanced functions to businesses that couldn't afford to do them on their own. So it has leveled the playing field, and that's really what Che is talking about, is that these homegrown pieces of software that these large companies built themselves and spent millions and millions of dollars on are no longer an advantage, and you don't see that anymore. And instead, you see the advantage of companies that didn't have this base of developers, but instead leverage tools that were available in the cloud. So it's a really interesting way of pulling these concepts together to help you to understand how development has changed over time, how companies can keep up by leveraging technology and software as a service and cloud computing to their advantage. Because what it enables us to do is to really focus on our actual core competency. So if our core competency is making cars, or picking people up in cars, or making toothbrushes or something like that, we can leverage technology that's available to do accounting and customer relationship management and expense reporting, so that we can focus our capital on that core competency instead of on technology, which these days it's going to be really tough to develop an application that's better than a software as a service application that's available, in the cloud. How can a company really expect to compete with Salesforce in customer relationship management? And I remember, like, for example, we have a Tesla and we have a Ford Explorer, and the difference in customer service between these two companies is like night and day. Tesla obviously has a core competency in technology, and Ford's technology is in systems. But one of the issues that they had is for decades and decades, because I think this system was originally developed in the 1970s. They had a CRM system called CKS, Customer Knowledge System. And where Salesforce came along and Oracle came along and Microsoft came along with, customer relationship management systems, they maintained CKS. And you can see the difference in connectivity, in customer communication, that is so significant between a company that 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 leveraged, technology in the cloud, because they do use Salesforce. Oh, sorry guys, hang on. So, so Tesla used Salesforce when they first launched, and since then, I think some years ago, they did develop their own system. But they were able to leverage cloud computing as they started out, which is an important element, right? They were able to leverage cloud systems so that they could focus all of their technology talent on their core competency, which was the vehicle, and upgrading the vehicle and making sure the vehicle was doing what it was supposed to do. Over time, obviously, they are a technology company. They have more than enough skills to potentially just develop something that was specifically focused on what they needed. So, and the nice thing about cloud computing as software as a service is it can be used that way. So they haven't companies that invest in Salesforce and Oracle and Microsoft can use it while they need it, and if they decide to do something else, they can just turn it off and use something else, and it gives them the freedom to innovate and make sure that they've got the right system versus embedded systems that are very difficult to unplug from. So, so anyway, what Che studied was that this custom development advantage went away, and the other companies that were leveraging off the software were actually doing better. So it's an important element, as we as individual business people look at what we need in order to run our business. We need to make sure that we're leveraging our core competency, taking advantage of tools that are available to improve our relationship with our consumers, and hopefully improve our bottom line. That's it.